Can you use charm packs in a 3-yard quilt? Let's find out. Hi, it's Hannah with Fabric Cafe, and welcome back to What Quilting Taught Me. This is a new series we're doing where I show you quilts that I have made, how I did them differently, and I tell you about all the little mistakes and problems I encountered and how I solved those. Well, today I'm going to show you how to use charm packs to make a 3-yard quilt. So let's check out the quilt. This is our balance pattern, and it comes from our book, Quilts on the Double. And you can see I have all of these different colors right here. That's where I used my charm pack. Charm packs are 5x5 blocks, and so I wanted to have lots of different things to look at, and I got this beautiful, whimsical, fun feeling one. Now, when you're choosing a pattern for charm blocks, you need to make sure that what you're using them for is the same size, either 5x5 or smaller. This block is a little bit smaller than that, so I did have to trim them, and I'll give you some tips on how to do that later. You can also see that I used more than 3 fabrics. So I've got one for my background, and then I'm alternating my blocks in other colors. And I'll get more into why I chose all the ones I did, and a different color for my binding. All right, so I mentioned that this is our balance pattern. It does come from our book, Quilts on the Double. A great thing about our books, they come with 8 different patterns, and all of those patterns are written for 3 different sizes. So you've got a lap, a twin, and a king queen. We do all the math for you so you don't have to worry about it, which if you're like me, that's a great perk. Before I jump into my fabric choices that I made for my quilt, I want to just show you a comparison of what the quilt looks like in just 3 yards. So in all of our patterns, we have this great fabric selection guide here and the quilt right here. So you can see this is your fabric 1, which is usually your most predominant fabric, your biggest, the one you want to show off the most. Then we have a white block, which is for your number 2 fabric, and that's usually your background. Then we have our number 3, which you can see pictured here, which is usually what frames everything and kind of gives it that extra boost and pop. So we have this really great batik kit I want to show you. So we have our number 1 fabric, which has all of these multicolored florals and leaves on this dark navy mottled texture, and that's going to go in all of your focus blocks, so it'll be the cascading down and on one of your borders. Then our number 2 fabric is this really fun square on a light green, so that light green picks up all of those touches of green in your floral, and it also has some of those pinks that are also in some of the floral, so it just brings in a lot of the texture and colors. And that's going to go everywhere you see the white in your diagram. Then we have our number 3. And our number 3 is this dark green. And you want to get a lot of contrast between your number 1 and your number 3 so that it frames it nicely. And this green just looks stunning up against this dark navy. It really adds a lot of texture and color, and that's going to go everywhere you see the black in your diagram. And you can see just how nicely that came together. The number 2 has a lot of interest in it, which is also important in this pattern because you can see there's large blocks for that number 2. And that number 3 has enough contrast that it pops off of that floral, and you can really see both colors and nothing gets muddied together. It just turned out so beautiful. Now let's take a look at what my charm pack quilt looks like next to it. So you can see some of the differences there. So I used a different charm in all of my blocks, so there's a lot of different things you can look at. I also framed my blocks with different colors and alternated them. So I think that really highlights that cascading effect that you have going down your quilt. I did keep my number 2 fabric the same. Both versions are gorgeous, and you can really do whatever you want with this pattern. So let's talk fabric. So first off, we have our charm pack. Now here's an example of one of the charms in there, and you can see it's a nice 5x5 block. This is a fun pack that I got from Moda. It's a ruby star, and I love how whimsical it is. It's got all these forest themes. We've got, these cute little mushrooms. We also have some great florals, and a lot of them have this really fun touch of metallic. So how I decided which ones I was going to use, I went to my pattern first, and I literally just counted the blocks in the quilt to see how many charm packs I needed. And I just looked at this little diagram right here and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I counted how many I needed. Easy peasy, first step done. Then you just go to your charm pack and you pick which ones you like the most, because as you can see, I had more than I needed. So I've got a few left so I can make a pillow or something like that, little companion pieces for my quilt. And I just picked how many I would need that were my favorite. Once that was done, it was time to find my companion fabrics. I found this really fun teal, and you can see this teal has a little touch of metallic. And I really like when you're matching a bunch of different fabrics in a quilt to find something that brings it all together. So I chose the little touch of gold to be the thing that I kept through all of the different fabrics. And then I found this dark blue that has these little peppers of a lighter blue and that gold dot. Now, when I picked these, I had originally intended just to use this fabric for bordering all of my blocks, but I encountered a problem when I was looking at it with them. It was going to look really good with some of my blocks, like this one, for example. You can see that it has a lot of contrast and it really pops. But some of them, like this one, it blended in too much, and I didn't like that there wasn't very much contrast. I encountered the same problem when I used this blue, which I had just intended to use for my border and binding. So you can see it looks really good against this light teal because there's a lot of contrast. But then when I put it next to something like this, or this dark blue, or even these blacks that you can see in the quilt, it didn't show up as much. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I do with this? Do I need to pick more different charm packs, or do I need to pick different fabrics to go with them? And it was actually Blake's idea to alternate my blocks and to use the teal for some of them and to use the blue for some of them. And after he said it, it seemed so obvious. Of course, just change it up. So then I can do the teal on all the ones that it pops against, and I can do the dark blue against all the ones that it pops with that. Then I have my number 2 fabric. And this is actually the same print as my teal you saw, but it's a different colorway. And I really liked it because, again, it has that touch of gold, and it's not just white. It has this nice gray texture on it, which there's a lot of gray in the blocks as well, in some of those charm blocks, which I thought brought it out nicely. And it has a lot of interest still. There's a lot of movement happening because as I mentioned in this block, you can see these are pretty big. So if you had just a plain one, it might not be quite as visually striking, but I didn't want to have something that had too much, that it took away from all of my different blocks. So I thought that was a great choice. I chose to use the same number 2 fabric for all of my number 2 because I like to have the same background. I think that it really highlights all of your other blocks and the piecing that you have done. If I had changed up the colors, it would have changed the pattern up a little. This is just personal preference. It's totally your choice on what you decide to do. I chose a different fabric for my binding. I did this for a couple reasons. One, I panic bought it because I was so afraid I wasn't gonna have enough fabric, because I was like, well, I'm doing something different. What if I run out? That was silly because, as you can see, I still have enough. I could have done my binding from either one of these. But I really like the way it turned out. I like having that extra little pop of color right there on the end. So I chose this black, and it's a rose, and it has lots of gray texture in it as well. So it has a nice highlight, and they're all framed in their gold. So there's that through line still coming through. I actually really like how it ended up here on the binding next to this dark border. Borders, you get to choose whatever fabric you want where. It's totally up to you what you want to highlight. I chose my number 2 here because I thought it framed out and finished the design with these blocks, so you could really see that staggered effect. But then the other 2, I just picked which one I liked the best. The teal is my favorite because teal is my favorite color, and this border is just slightly bigger than this one, so I put it in that position. It actually turned out really fun, I think, because it goes from light to medium to dark to darkest. That was a happy accident. I didn't really mean to do that, but I think it turned out really well. So let's talk quilt construction. So we found our block here, and this is your finished block. To assemble it, you actually do it in a strip assembly. So this makes it really easy when you're using yardage, because you can just, sew long strips together and then you just cut a unit off. But we can't do that because we're using charm packs. So this is how you do that. You're gonna come over here to your cutting instructions. So there's only one strip assembly in this. So you just look for Fabric 1 strip assembly. So I'm gonna come over here. It's the first thing on the cutting instructions here, which is great. I'm gonna look at what I'm supposed to cut my width of fabric strip by, because that's what you do. You cut along with the fabric strip to sew together to make your units. So for example, if it says to cut a 5-inch by width of fabric strip, you don't have to do anything because your charm blocks are already 5 by 5. But if it tells you to cut it 4.5 by width of fabric, you need to trim your charm pack down to a 4.5 by 4.5 block. I want to give a tip on a tool to use. I love square rulers. This is my favorite quilting tool there is. I have them in 5 different sizes, I think, and I want more. I want just a variety of them. So here's a nice little one. This is a 4.5 one. And then this is a 6.5. This one's probably my most used one, but then there's a 9.5. And I just love them. I love using them. It allows me to get more precision, I think. I use it even when I'm not doing squares. When I'm doing long strips, I tend to use it as well because I feel like I can just get it more accurate. And when you're doing little pieces, it's nice because you don't have to line it up on your cutting mat, make sure your cutting mat is not crooked, you can do all that. It doesn't matter. You just can put it on there anywhere on your cutting mat. So it's really convenient when you're working on a project and you've got this here and this there. A little weird quirk about me too is, say I'm cutting a 4.5. Now this is exactly 4.5, but I don't like using it for that. I don't know why. I like using this for smaller things like 3-inch, 2-inch, things like that if I'm doing really small work, because I like having a little bit extra to hold on to. This is totally personal preference. I have no idea why I feel this way. It's just how it goes. So we've got our block. What you're gonna do is you're gonna line it up and you're gonna follow the same sort of method you would for trimming a half square triangle. And you're just gonna line it up a little bit inside of what your final cut will be so that you can get a nice straight edge on there. So I have it hanging over just a little bit extra, and you just take your little rotary cutter and you boop and boop, and then flip it over so you can see I've got my nice clean straight edge there that we just chopped off. Then I'm gonna line this back up on my square and I'm gonna line it up exactly where the edge needs to be. And I also really like these because they have these corners on it, so it hugs the corner of the block, so it makes it really clear, all right, this is where I stop. And you boop, boop, and then voila, your charms are all cut down to the right size. You're gonna have to do that for all of your charms. So after you do all of that, you will cut long strips for your number 3 fabric that frames all your blocks. Now normally when you're sewing them, you sew the long strips, but since we can't do that, what we're gonna do is you have to do it one at a time. I'm gonna show you how I did it, and then I'm gonna show you a different way I came up with recently that I think might be faster. So here we have a long strip. This is just with the fabric. You just follow the instructions for your strip assembly for fabric 3. And then I sewed it onto the end of one of my blocks. So you can see that there. It can be the top and bottom first, or you can do it on the sides first. I like to do it on the top and bottom just because that's how it is in the strip assembly, so it made sense to me. To save some time, because you're gonna have to sew this onto the bottom as well, while I'm at the machine, I will sew one, and then I just take my scissors and I give a little bit extra room. You can see I'm not cutting it right up next to it because I wanna be able to press and trim it when it is a little bit more precise. And then I'm just gonna snip off a little boop. So there's a little hanging off. And then, so I can stay at the machine while I do this, I just take my strip, I lay it with my block, a little bit extra room on the end there so that, again, we can press and we can trim it evenly. You sew that on that end, and then you just repeat. You cut that little bit there, and you keep on using this strip for as many charms as you can. So that's a pretty fast way to do it. After you press and trim all of them to the accurate size, I would just repeat that whole process, doing it on the side borders. It goes pretty quick. Doing that little snipping trick at the sewing machine does save you some time. You don't have to, you know, take it over to your pressing mat and press it and then trim it. It does cut out some of those steps and makes it go a little bit faster. I thought of another idea, and I've never done this. So if you've done this and you like it, let me know. But I thought it might be just as effective and maybe faster if you do some chain piecing. So we have, again, one of those really long pieces. And you would take your charm and you would sew the first one together. And you can do this with the charm on top like this, or you could flip it and you could do it with the charm on the bottom. It's really your preference on what you want. But you would sew this one, you can see, and then you would take another one, give a little bit of space, and you would sew that. And then you would just keep on going and you would do all of one side first. Then you would press the whole thing, all of your seams, and then you would trim them to size. And then you would be able to do the exact same thing on the bottom and then on the sides. I'm not sure if this is faster. My head tells me maybe, but I'm not really sure since I have not done it. But I think either method would be really effective, really easy to do. Let me know which method would be your favorite. After you do all of your blocks, it's time to figure out where you want everything to go. Now, normally I would say to do that step at the beginning before you do any sewing, but since this was kind of a unique situation where I needed to see, I'm alternating teal and blue and teal, I needed to see the blocks completely finished. So I actually sewed all of those blocks and I cut out all of my number 2 fabric first so that I could lay it all out and really get an idea of where I wanted everything to go. You can see over here, like I've got this pink and then I've got this white. I didn't want pinks to be too close to each other. I wanted the teal spread out through the quilt. I wanted there to be balance, pun not intended, or pun maybe slightly intended. I wanted it to be scattered throughout the quilt so that it had a nice flow and there wasn't like a bunch of the same color all in one corner. I wanted it spread out evenly throughout the quilt. To do that, I laid all of my blocks out on the floor, and then I was able to move them around and decide, oh no, that's too much purple there. There's too much black right there. I need to move that. And it allowed me to really see what I was doing before I made any big commitments with sewing. I recommend doing this for all of your quilts. I do it for everyone, even if I'm not doing funny color changes. It just helps make sure you've got everything in line and all of it lined up perfectly in the rows. Nothing is turned upside down or anything like that. Take a picture when you finally have what you want, and then keep that picture as your guide. Organization also really helps with that, especially on something like this when you have a lot of different blocks. I have a clothesline in my sewing corner. It's a long piece of twine up on my wall, and I've got little clothespins that I'll like clip up a label and a fabric up there so that I can keep in mind what I've got. As I was making my rows, I laid them all out, and then when it was final, took my picture. I stacked one row on top of each other, and I put it up with a note that said row 1, so all of them were together. I did that for all of my rows. I kept that even after I had sewn them, so that I sewed it and I would put it back up there while I was working on the next. This is really helpful to keep organized. You can also use the baggie method, where you put a label and all of those blocks together so that you know this is what I'm working with. All right, now that your quilt top is done, it's time for you to get it quilted or quilt it yourself. I did not quilt this. I do not have the skills to do this yet. Well, I might not have the skills ever to do all of that detail. I have started doing a little bit of quilting myself at home, just for small projects right now, like a table runner or things like that. And it's a lot of fun. I do have a quilt in my mind that I would like to make and quilt down the road. This one I sent out to Lucinda Cox. She's one of the long arms we use here at Fabric Cafe. Her business is Yellow Rose Quilt and Stitch Studio. She does some great work. We've worked with her for a long time, and so I sent this out to her to get done. What she does is she'll send me 3 different designs, and I get to look through them and tell her which one I like, or I can ask for other options. So first off, we have this swirl, little almost diamondy effect. And I do like, you know, wavy movement that I feel sort of reflects the movement in the quilt. So that's number one. Thought that one was really pretty. The second one she showed me was fireflies. And this one has that nice whimsical forest theme that is scattered throughout all of the charms in the quilt. And it has this nice movement with all the different swirls, like you can really see the fireflies flying. The third option was butterflies. And this kind of has that same feel too, of that forest theme. You know, it's nature and it's got that nice swirl of the butterflies moving through space. Usually when I get these emails with all the different pictures, I send them to my sisters and ask feedback on what do you like the best. I didn't have to do that with this one. I knew immediately which one I wanted, and I wanted the fireflies. I thought it was so cute, so sweet. It matched that whimsical feel, and it just felt like you were out in the twilight woods at night, which is kind of how this fabric feels to me, with all of the different touches of, there's some owls peeking in there on some of the blocks, there's the moons, mushrooms. I thought it fit the aesthetic perfectly. For thread color, I asked her if she could use teal, because I thought it had a fun feel to, bringing in that whimsy a little bit. And it picks up this teal here. Like I said, it's my favorite color. It also picks up a lot of the colors in the blocks, because a lot of these blocks actually have a touch of teal in them. Just a little hint every now and then. We've got some mushrooms that are in teal. We've got some of the owl wings have some teal touches on them. So I thought it would look really nice and kind of tie everything together. But what I'm also really excited to show you is the back. I think she outdid herself, because we did teal on the front, but she did gold on the back. And I adore this. I think it was such a smart idea, because it picks up that gold that's throughout the whole quilt, and it also looks like it's fireflies flying at night. Like, it feels like you can see them glowing. I just think it turned out gorgeous. I was so pleased with it. This might be my favorite quilt I've made. I don't know. I've made a few others that I really, really like, but this one has such a tender spot in my heart. So now let's talk about why I chose my backing fabric. Funny story, I actually had an entirely different fabric selected, cut, and sewn all ready for the long arm for this quilt. It was this mottled silver gray, and it was beautiful, very pretty fabric. But then I went to the Tyler Quilt Show, and I saw one of the vendors had this fabric in their booth. And this is a fabric that's from the same line as the Ruby Star charm pack that I was using. And I had to have it. I thought it worked perfectly. I loved this dark teal going with it, which picks up a bunch of those other colors in it. And it has that gold. And I love it's got these little dots on it, which makes it even more like the fireflies are really flying and glowing. So I think it turned out gorgeous. And don't worry, I was able to use that silver backing for my next quilt, because it looked perfect with it. I wanted to take a minute to share with you a quilt that one of you guys sent in. We love seeing all of the quilts that you guys make, especially when you show us how you changed it up and made it your own. It's so exciting. So today I want to share with you Sandy's quilt. Sandy sent in a picture of her Perfect Pets. Now, Perfect Pets is a pattern that has applique on it. You can either do a cat or a dog. And what she did for her applique is amazing. She used different bandanas for every single one. And so there's lots of different colors, lots of different patterns with all those different bandanas. As you probably noticed in videos, I wear a lot of bandanas. I am quite partial to them. So Sandy, I love it. I think that was such a creative use of that. And you probably have fabric like that around your house. So you can really think outside the box. If you would like to have one of your quilts featured in a video, then be sure to watch our social media. We'll put out posts requesting to see different things that you're working on so that we can share them with everyone else. Links to all those are in the description. And if you've made anything with charm packs, doesn't have to be balanced. If you've made any 3-yard quilts with charm packs, I would love to see it. So please send them to us. Remember, you can also use 3 yards of fabric to make this pattern. This is that batik kit we showed you earlier. You can find a link to that in the description or available at fabriccafe.com. That pattern we use today is our balance pattern from the book Quilts on the Double. Or maybe you want to use charm packs, but you want to use a different pattern. Super easy. Just make sure that whatever block you're using is 5 by 5 or smaller. If you would like to see me make a 3-yard quilt from fabric scraps, well, be sure to watch the video that pops up. It's Hannah with Fabric Cafe. Happy quilting!